Grayridge was a place you only went to if you were lost, or if you had once called it home and had nowhere else to go. The town lay between vast stretches of abandoned land, where farms once stood, now just rusted machinery skeletons and weeds taller than your knees. The population had halved after the drought of 2014, and the remaining residents had learned how to live without hope. The only thing that still worked here steadily was time, and sometimes it sputtered like an old engine. Caleb Moore lived alone in a small wooden house behind the garage his father had left him. He couldn't remember the last time the garage had been crowded. Maybe it was last winter when an ice storm knocked out several heating systems. After that, everything had gone still, like a world running low on gas. That Monday started like every other. Bitter coffee, gray skies, a garage door that stuck halfway, and a set of screwdrivers that weren't a match for each other. Then, from far away came the sound of an engine, a low guttural noise like metal scraping across stone. An old tractor rolled up in front of the garage. Built in the 80s, its rear wheels stripped of paint, the front ones off kilter. The driver was a young woman, her hair tied up high, her face covered in road dust, but with eyes that shone sharp. Those kind of eyes that made you feel like you were being measured, without a single word. "Sorry, are you open?" she asked, her voice a little husky. Caleb nodded and put down his coffee. "You got the guts to drive that beast down the highway?" She shrugged. "It made it this far, I guess." After a few minutes of checking, Caleb figured out the problem was with the drive shaft, not something that breaks easily unless someone wants it to. But he didn't say anything. His hands had enough experience to know when to keep quiet. "Give me a few hours," he said. "I'm not in a rush," she replied. She sat down on an old rusty metal chair in front of the garage, pulling out a notebook and a pencil. No phone, no earbuds, just writing and watching him work. For a strange moment, Caleb felt like he was being observed, not out of curiosity, but with a quiet kind of acknowledgement, as if she was checking something in him. "Where are you from?" he asked. "The West," she said, "where no one's left." "Grayridge is not exactly bustling either," Caleb laughed. She stared at him for a long time, then gave a small, knowing smile. "I know." By late afternoon, the tractor was fixed. Caleb wiped his hands off and said, "No charge, really. This thing should be in a museum." She looked up, meeting his gaze squarely. "Are you sure?" "Sure," he said, "but if it breaks down again on the road, don't tell anyone I screwed it up." She stood, offering her hand. "Hannah Lowell." "Caleb." The handshake was short but firm, like both of them signing a silent contract. Hannah climbed onto the tractor, started the engine, and the sound of the motor echoed, fading into the red dust. Caleb stood there for a long while, then went back into the garage. On the workbench, he found a torn piece of paper from her notebook with just one line written on it. "You still have rhythm." He frowned. They had never talked about his skills, never mentioned the word rhythm. But what made his skin prickle was the handwriting. Neat, slanted, so familiar, like he'd seen it somewhere a long time ago. He held the paper in his hand for what felt like hours, until the dust from the ink started making his fingertips itch. "You still have rhythm." What rhythm? The rhythm of turning a wrench, the rhythm of life? Caleb hadn't thought about keeping any rhythm for a long time. He stuffed the paper into a drawer next to an old photo of him and his father standing in front of the garage, back when his hair was thick and his work shirt still white. The photo had faded over the years, but he could still remember every oil stain on his father's sleeve from that day. When his father passed, Caleb didn't cry. Not because he didn't feel anything, but because he didn't know how to feel. His father had slumped over his coffee cup in the garage, his heart stopping like an old engine after a long winter. They said it was a peaceful death, but Caleb always felt it was too quiet, like even the town couldn't be bothered to remember. After that, Caleb shut down. Less talking, fewer customers, fewer people hollered, Plenty of witnessing, many of the dozen or more alibi false death. Fix a car, close the door, sleep, repeat. Old friends moved away, loyal customers became fewer. The next morning, while Caleb was cleaning the wrenches, Mr. McKinley, a regular, walked in. "I heard a young woman stop by the garage yesterday," he said without greeting. Caleb nodded. "The tractor broke down." "What's her name?" "Hannah Lowell, I think." McKinley furrowed his brow. "Lowell? Do you know her?" Caleb asked. McKinley didn't answer right away. "The Lowells used to live here, but they left after the house fire 4 years ago." "A fire?" "Yeah. The log cabin up north. 2 people died and no one came back after that." Caleb fell silent, not asking any more questions. McKinley left slowly, as if giving Caleb time to figure something out. And freezing. In the afternoon, Caleb opened the garage door to let in the breeze. The spring wind in Grayridge smelled of decayed earth and old wood. Familiar, yet unpleasant. He thought again about Hannah. There was something out of place about her. Young people didn't come to places like this, places where time was covered in grease and memories that never ended. But Hannah hadn't just come, she had observed, taken notes. And the way she looked at him when he spoke, like she'd heard it before, somewhere. Caleb went to check the tractor she'd left behind. When he opened the engine cover, he froze. There were fingerprints on the air filter cover, not his, and a small oil smear, not regular oil. It was thick, dark, and smelled like military diesel, completely out of place for a corn harvester. He didn't tell anyone, just silently wiped the oil off, screwed the cap back on, and went back to his office. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his cold cup of coffee. That night, Caleb pulled out an old box of his father's things. In it there were technical documents, a few warranties, and a small notebook, its first page marked with the name Lowell, underlined twice. Caleb didn't remember his father ever mentioning that name, but why had he written it down? As he was about to turn to the next page, there was a knock at the door. 3 knocks. Not hard, not hurried, just steady. Caleb stepped outside. Hannah was standing there. "I forgot my notebook," she said, holding out her hand. Caleb gave it to her. She took it, thanked him. "Do you always keep everything?" she asked. "Only the things that don't belong to me." "Then where do you think I belong?" The question was a trap, but Caleb just shrugged. "I haven't known you long enough to guess. I'll be back Saturday to pick up the tractor, maybe. You'll remember something before then." "Something?" "About yourself, about this place. She left on an old bicycle rack, on the back, tires worn, no tractor, no car." That night, Caleb pulled out the old photo. It showed his father and another man, the backlighting making the other man's face hard to see. But in the corner of the photo, there was a little girl, her hair tied up high, standing on the porch step, staring directly into the camera. Into him. Caleb didn't put the photo away. He left it on the table, right next to the lamp. The yellow light reflected off the eyes in the photo, making them seem like they were still watching him. From a place he couldn't tell if he had forgotten or had never known.
Saturday morning was clouded over. A thin veil of gray clouds stretched across the sky above Grayridge, making everything look blurred, like you were peering through a fogged-up window. Caleb woke up earlier than usual, not to work on cars, but because he couldn't sleep. All night he thought about the old photograph. The little girl in the picture had never been mentioned by anyone, had no name, no dates, but her gaze was so familiar it was almost unsettling. Not the kind of familiarity you feel when you say, "I've seen that face before," but the kind that makes you feel like someone is holding your memory, the one you tried to forget. The garage was quiet, no cars, no customers. Caleb threw open the office window to let the cold air in, turned on the lights despite the morning sun still bright outside, and for the first time in years, he wiped clean the wooden sign hanging in front. More auto repairs. The layer of dust had built up so thick that only the word auto was clearly visible, like a part of the truth being erased, as if it were unconscious. Around noon, the sound of a tractor echoed in from the distance. It couldn't be mistaken. No one else in Grayridge drove like that except Hannah. She arrived in a dark shirt, hair neatly tied up, no makeup, no expression, but her eyes were still the same, deep, silent, as if they had seen through everything before she even stepped foot inside the garage. "The tractor runs fine," she said when she stopped near the door. "Thanks for fixing it." Caleb responded quietly, "No problem. I just did the easy part." Hannah tilted her head slightly, her voice light as a breeze, but enough to make him reconsider everything. "What's the hard part?" he replied, knowing why it broke. She didn't argue, just smiled. "Sometimes people need something to break, to have a reason to stop." She walked into the garage without waiting for an invitation, as though the place belonged to her. Her eyes scanned the corners, stopping at an old photo frame on the desk. "Who's in the picture?" "My father, and I think it's an old acquaintance." "What about the little girl?" "I don't know." Hannah touched her finger to the wooden frame, her voice softer but no less firm. "You should remember. Some things, if you don't remember, they'll find their way back to you." Caleb fell silent, then opened the drawer, pulling out his father's old notebook, the one with the name Lowell underlined twice, and set it down in front of her. She looked at it, didn't touch it, and showed no surprise. "How long have you kept this?" "Since my father passed." "Have you read it all?" "Not yet. Maybe you should read it soon. Some things aren't about fixing cars." The air between them thickened. Then she asked, "Have you ever thought about why you still live in this town?" Caleb didn't answer. Hannah looked out the window. "I left here once. When the fire happened, my family was gone. I was the only one left. No one asked, no one came to look for me. I think I was erased from this place. And now you've come back. Sometimes people need something to know they're still alive. An open door. Someone who remembers their name." Caleb stared at her for a long time. "So, you came here to be remembered?" "No, I came to see how long you could forget." Then Hannah pulled a small, neatly folded cloth from her pocket and placed it on the desk. It was the same cloth Caleb had picked up on a rainy day. He didn't ask, she didn't explain. "I'll be back," she said before leaving. "Not for the tractor." "For what then?" "For you still haven't asked the right question." And then she walked out of the garage, not looking back. When the tractor left, the dust billowed up, then settled, as though no one had been there at all. That night, Caleb didn't turn on the lights. He opened the notebook his father had left, reading from the beginning. The first page was a list of regular customers, names, addresses, car numbers. But as he got further into it, the handwriting changed. No dates, no technical details, only scattered notes like whispers. "Lowell is back. The child knows. Not time to tell Caleb. If I'm gone, who will open the door?" Caleb's heart slowed. He pulled out the old photo, the first time he really looked at it. And in the left corner of the photo, there was a shadow, a faint figure blending into the background, like someone standing behind a door, face hidden. He had never noticed that detail. But part of him knew. Hannah had seen it from the beginning. The next morning, Caleb drove out of the garage. He needed an excuse, something to pull him out of the suffocating air that hung over the place like wet paint. He drove to Rogers Supply Co., the only store in the area still selling used car parts. When he walked in, George, son of the late Mr. Rogers, recognized him immediately. "Caleb Moore, Moore's Garage, right?" Caleb nodded. George, as he walked to get the parts, asked casually, "Anyone been by your garage recently? A young girl, hair tied up?" Caleb froze. "Do you know her?" "No, but that look. I've seen it. A long time ago, around the fire up north, there was a girl who survived. No one knew her name. The police filed it away, never followed up." Caleb stayed quiet. George continued, "There's talk that that family didn't die in the fire, they disappeared before that." "So, who was burned?" Caleb asked. "No one knows for sure. 2 bodies, not intact." On the way back, Caleb drove past the empty lot where the Lowell family home once stood. Now there was only weeds, a few scorched patches of concrete, and a crumbling wall with faded letters. "God doesn't see everything." He stood there, silent, not thinking, but knowing something was still waiting. When he returned to the garage, there was a technical drawing on the desk, printed on pale yellow paper. A diagram of a semi-automatic transmission for a 1970S tractor. In the corner of the paper was a handwritten note. "The problem is with the rhythm." Caleb recognized the handwriting. It was his father's, no doubt. That night, he plugged the old landline phone back into the garage. At exactly 1:27 a.m., the phone rang. He picked up the receiver. No one spoke. Just an electronic voice came through. "If you've opened the book, it's time to ask Caleb why you're still alive." Then there was nothing but the sound of a dial tone. Caleb set the receiver down, his heart cold. He wasn't afraid of what had been said. He was afraid that it was true. The next morning, Caleb didn't open the door. He rummaged through his father's old storage room, where he'd stayed in his final years. Under the bed, he found an old wooden box. Inside were 3 things: a death certificate for someone named Hannah Lowell, a collection of old photos of the garage foundation before it was built, and an ID card with the name Hannah L. The photo was in color, stamped with the year 2007, and Hannah was a teenager. But Caleb didn't remember her ever being in Grayridge, never went to school with her, never saw her at the garage. Why had his father kept these things? And why didn't Caleb remember? That night, he didn't sleep. For the first time, he opened the notebook again and wrote, "I'm not sure I'm a good person. But if memories know their way back, I must have the courage to open the door for them." Outside, the garage light cast a glow through the glass. The air was still. No sound. But somewhere in the quiet, Caleb knew something was standing outside the door and had been waiting a long time. The morning in Grayridge passed quietly, just like every other day, but inside Caleb Moore something no longer kept the usual rhythm. Ever since Hannah appeared, the world around him hadn't changed. It was just the way it always was. But the feeling was different. The light felt harsher, the wind sharper, and everything familiar seemed to have shifted ever so slightly, enough that he couldn't find himself the way he once had. That afternoon, as he was tightening a part under the chassis of an old Ford, Caleb heard the sound of someone knocking on the steel frame of the door, not loud, but rhythmic, as if it wasn't the first time that person had been here. A man stood in the doorway, tall, thin, with salt and pepper hair, deep-set eyes. He wore a rolled-up denim shirt, more the style of a mechanic than a customer. "Are you Caleb Moore?" the man asked. "Still I am, unless someone's come to change the name on the sign," Caleb replied, his voice cautious. The man smiled faintly. "I'm Marcus Vane. I used to work here 17 years ago, back when you probably weren't old enough to handle a nail gun." Caleb nodded. The name was vague, but there was something odd in Marcus's eyes. Not the look of someone reminiscing about old times, but the look of someone waiting for something to come out of him. "I was passing through and saw the door open," Marcus said, "and I heard rumors that Hannah Lowell's back." Caleb tightened his grip on the wrench. "She an old friend?" Marcus glanced around the garage as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "She's not just Hannah Lowell. That's the surface, the deeper part. I'm afraid you've forgotten." "Forgotten what?" "Ever wonder why no one ever talks about the fire? Why no one came to investigate properly? No media, no cameras?" Caleb stayed silent. Marcus pulled out a crumpled photo. It showed a young girl standing next to a man whose face was hidden, with the morgue garage in the background. Before it was painted. The girl stared directly at the camera. Her hair was tied up high. She held something tightly in her hand. Looked like a small wrench. "This picture was taken in 2008, Marcus said. "And I swear, that kid never grew up. Not in the usual way." "What do you mean?" "I mean, something doesn't move with time the way we think. It lingers. And you, Caleb, you're right in the middle of it." That night, Caleb dreamed of Hannah standing in the garage, her back to him. Every time he called her, she didn't turn around, but each time he moved closer, the distance grew longer, as if the garage itself was stretching out endlessly. Eventually, he found himself standing before a steel door with no handle. On it were the words, "Only those who have denied may return." He woke up, his shirt soaked with cold sweat. The next morning, there was a customer in the garage, a young guy wearing glasses driving a newer pickup truck. While waiting for an oil change, he asked, "Do you know the woman who drives the green tractor? I've seen her park here a few times." Caleb nodded. "Is she the garage owner?" the guy asked. "I saw her go into the office without asking." Caleb froze. "No, she doesn't work here." "Oh, I thought she did because I saw her write something on the parts board in there." Caleb walked into the office right after the customer left. The white parts board was still there, and sure enough, there was a new line written. "Don't forget to ask why he knows how to fix things he's never learned." It was in Hannah's handwriting. That night, Caleb turned the camera back on, not to watch Hannah, but to watch himself. He fast-forwarded through the footage from the first day she'd come. Everything looked normal, until there was a section where he stood in front of the tractor, checking it, and then Hannah vanished from the frame, only to reappear a few seconds later, standing in a different spot. The camera wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't rewound. There was just a gap, about 3 seconds, where she wasn't there. He rewound it, played it slowly, frame by frame. In the gap where she had stood, there was a shadow, not a figure but a blur, just faintly there, and then it disappeared. Caleb shut off the machine. He wasn't scared, not anymore. The feeling now wasn't fear. It was confrontation. Like his body had known for a long time, but his mind had only just caught up. He picked up his father's notebook and turned to the first page. Inside the cover, there was a faint pencil note. If Hannah comes back, maybe she never left. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He turned on the desk lamp and opened his father's notebook again, looking for any traces of what he had once considered insignificant. But the more he read, the more it felt unnervingly familiar, as if he wasn't reading it for the first time, but reading something he had written long ago. Around 3 a.m., when only the faint hum of the light could be heard, Caleb rested his head on the table and drifted off. In his dream, he was about 10 years old, standing in the garage in complete darkness. Someone, face unseen, pulled him into a back room. They whispered something into his ear. "If you see the little girl, don't speak, don't tell, not even your father." The whisper was icy cold. Then the image vanished. Caleb woke up, cold sweat on his forehead, his heart pounding. He didn't know whether that dream was real or if his mind had just filled in the gaps of memory, but the thing that chilled him most was he couldn't rule it out. The next morning, when Caleb opened the garage door, the first thing he saw was his father's notebook. 3 pages torn from the middle. The remaining pages were folded at the corner with faint fingerprints in machine oil. No one had keys to the office. No one but him. He checked the cameras. The footage from midnight to 4 a.m. was blank. No image, just a continuous buzzing sound. In the corner of the garage, the main electrical panel blinked a few times and then went dark. Caleb walked closer. A faint burnt smell lingered, like someone had disconnected a wire and reconnected it incorrectly. Every small detail repeated. Nothing was taken, but everything was out of place. By noon, Marcus came back. No warning, no knock. Caleb was cleaning the spark plugs when he walked in, like he had lived there his whole life. "Something happened last night," Marcus said bluntly. Caleb looked up. "How do you know?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He pulled an old cassette tape from his jacket pocket, the kind no one used anymore, the label worn off. "I found this after your father's funeral. I was going to give it to you but wasn't sure if you'd be ready." Caleb took it, his hands shaking slightly. "What's on it?" Marcus tightened his hat's strap. "Your father's voice. For someone he thought could carry on if things came back." "Carry on what?" Marcus looked around the garage, his eyes scanning the shadows on the wall. "There are things that can't be destroyed. They can only be delayed." Caleb didn't play the tape right away. He waited until nightfall, when the town was asleep. The old recorder in the storage room still worked, thankfully. He slid the tape in, a crackling sound, then a voice, gravelly, familiar, bone-chilling. "Caleb, if you're hearing this, then I was wrong, or it came back at the right time. I hope it's the latter," his father's voice. "There's something I once thought was a technical fault, but the more I fixed it, the more I realized it wasn't in the machines, it's in the people, in the memories, in the faults." A pause, followed by a long sigh. "Hannah isn't a bad person, but she doesn't know how to stop. You'll understand when you start remembering. You met her when you were too young to understand." A rustling sound, then the final words. "If you choose to keep the garage, you have to accept some people don't come to fix cars. They come to see if you've kept your promise." The tape stopped. No rewind, no background music, just real voice, real words, in an eerily quiet space. Caleb turned off the machine. The room seemed to close in on him. A promise. What promise? He had never made one, or maybe he had, but he had forgotten. By the end of the day, when he locked up the garage, there was a folded piece of paper shoved under the door. No address, no sender. Just one line written in pencil. "Next time, leave the lights on. If you really want to remember." That night, Caleb sat alone in the pitch-black garage, not turning on the lights, just as the note under the door had instructed. He didn't believe in superstitions, nor did he believe in things like the tests from the past mentioned in his father's recording. But one thing he wasn't so sure of anymore was his own memory. The smell of the garage at night was always a mix: old motor oil, damp wood, and the cold air rising from the cracked cement floor. But tonight there was something else, something new. The smell of fresh lime, like someone had scraped the old paint off the walls. He ran his hand along the northern wall. There was a slight protrusion, higher than the rest of the wall. When he pried it open with a screwdriver, a thin section of the wall came off. Inside was a small recess, hiding a dark, oilcloth-bound notebook. No date, only 3 hastily scrawled words on the cover. Things not written. The next morning, Caleb took the notebook to the old bakery at the end of the street, the place where Marcus had once met him. They sat at a table by the dusty window. Marcus flipped through the pages. It wasn't a journal. It wasn't technical notes. It was a list. Names of people who had visited the garage, worked there, or even passed away. Next to each name was a note. "Benar knows, but won't say." Melinda saw Hannah, forgot after 2 weeks. Caleb, 2008, doesn't remember. Good. Father, 2015, tried to hold on, broke at the end. Marcus frowned. You really met her? Caleb stared out the window. I'm starting to believe that. Any part of it talk about the reason? Marcus asked. Caleb flipped to near the end, a hurriedly scribbled passage, shaky handwriting. It's not evil. It tests, it repeats. Those who remember will hurt. Those who forget will repeat. Pain is still better. Caleb read it over and over. Repeat what? Marcus looked at him. Maybe this garage isn't about fixing cars. Maybe it's here to test how long we can stay ourselves before our memories are wiped clean. Caleb asked, You really believe that? Marcus nodded slowly. I didn't. Not until I saw someone come back to life, as though they'd never died. That afternoon, Caleb returned to the garage and reopened the old photo album. A picture of the back of the garage appeared. There was a metal door covered in vines. He'd never walked through it, or had he, but forgotten? Just before sunset, he grabbed a flashlight, crossed over piles of rotting tires, and pushed the vines aside. The door was still there, rusted, unlocked, but heavy. Behind it was an empty room, the floor covered in green moss, the walls marked with a scribbled chalk message. The last one who remembers is the only one who must choose. On the floor was a small tin box. Inside was an employee ID card, Caleb Moore, Windsor Grain and Feed Co. The photo was him, young, wearing a uniform. But Caleb had never worked there. The company had gone bankrupt in 2009, and the signature on the card. It was his. That night, Hannah came back. No warning, no car, no knock on the door. She just walked in, sat down on the wooden chair next to the desk, silent, as though this were her house, not his. Caleb didn't ask anything. She spoke first. Did you open the notebook? Yes. And the back door? Also yes. For the first time, Hannah looked him straight in the eye. No mockery, no hiding. So, are you ready? Ready for what? To remember everything? Caleb neither nodded nor shook his head. He just stared at her. Hannah nodded, walked over to the desk, opened the notebook Caleb had left there, and wrote a line. If memory is pain, then is forgetting a sin. Then, without a word, she left. Caleb sat there for a long time, not turning on the light, not writing anything more, just staring at the line, reading it over and over. And he knew, tomorrow, everything would be different. The next morning, Caleb woke early, his head heavy as if he had just walked out of a dream that didn't belong to him. He made coffee but didn't drink it. His hand reached for an old file, something he had once thought he would never open. Inside was a report about an accident. Boy fell off ladder while helping to clean garage wall. It was the year Caleb was 11. But he didn't remember anything. The smell of grease? Yes. His father yelling? Yes. But the fall? The small scar on his neck? No. It was as if someone had pulled that piece of memory out of his mind. He opened the second drawer, where he kept the small notebook. The first page was his handwriting. If Hannah comes back today, I need to ask, why don't I remember the first time she came? Below that was a notation, CM/6, 2015. Caleb pulled his hand away from the notebook. He had never kept this one. In 2015, he had been undergoing treatment for depression after his father's death, not writing in any journals, not talking to anyone. So why was this notebook here, and why was that handwriting his? At noon, a new customer arrived at the garage, a middle-aged man driving an old Mercury. He didn't look familiar, but Caleb couldn't place his name. Hello, my car's slipping out of gear. Could be the hydraulic line, the man said. Caleb nodded and led him inside to begin the paperwork. Without thinking, he opened the third drawer, the one that usually only held old receipts. But today, there was a drawing neatly placed inside. A schematic of the hydraulic system for a 1982 Mercury, the exact make and model of the car. The corner of the drawing had the signature, Caleb Moore. The ink was blue, no date. He had never drawn this, but the way it was numbered, the way the notes were written, it was unmistakably his. And what made him cold was that the schematic described the exact problem with the car, before the man had even mentioned it. That afternoon, Hannah came again. No beating around the bush. She sat down on the doorstep, pulled a folded map from her pocket, a hand-drawn map. The location of the shed behind the garage was marked in red. "I used to be here," she said, "before the fire. Before your father lived for so long." Caleb looked at her. "How old are you?" She paused for a beat, then answered, as if the wind had whispered it through the crack in the door. "I don't count anymore." "It doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because when you remember too much, the years don't mean anything. It's only about repetition." "Did you forget?" Then remembered. "It hurt, but pain is still better. What if I choose to keep forgetting?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Then you'll keep living, fixing cars, drinking coffee, and then you'll meet me again, under another name, another machine failure. Everything will repeat until you remember." "Do I have a choice?" "Always, but only once." When Hannah left, Caleb stood on the doorstep for a long time. The sky above Grayridge was thick with gray. No rain, but it felt as if the town was holding its breath. He didn't go home. He stayed in the garage, not turning on the lights, sitting in front of the notebook. Not his father's, but his own. The first page was blank. The second page had a line that had just appeared, the ink still wet. "If you have the courage to remember, tomorrow will no longer be a circle." No signature, no sound that night. It was just Caleb hadn't written that line, but it was his handwriting. Caleb Moore had long since stopped counting the days since Hannah Lowell first walked into the garage. Everything after that no longer felt like a series of moments in time, but like old memories slowly peeling away like silver paint on the walls, revealing something that had once been deliberately hidden. The garage was still open. Cars still came and went. The sound of coffee boiling steadily in the old pot, and the radio still caught snippets of music interrupted by static. But inside Caleb, everything had shifted off its orbit. He no longer believed in the concept of routine, because in those actions that seemed to repeat, he began to notice the clues. Every broken car, every customer who stopped by, each of them brought up something old, but in a way he had never fully remembered. One afternoon, Caleb stood before the fogged mirror hanging behind the office. He stared at himself for a long time, not because he didn't recognize that face, but because he was no longer sure it was the face others saw when they called out the name, Caleb Moore. The back door of the garage, the one leading to the burned-out shed, was now open again. No one knew about it. He cleaned it out, repainted the floor, set a simple wooden table, and placed a notebook on it. Every night when the town slept, he wrote, not to leave a record, not to confess, but to keep himself from drifting away. On a late spring night, as the rain pattered on the tin roof, Hannah returned. No car, no papers, no greeting. She stood in the garage, watching him wipe a wrench as if nothing had ever been broken. "Do you remember anything yet?" she asked. Caleb set the tool down. "I remember the first time my father told me to forget." "Tell me," she urged. "There was a time I asked about a girl who came into the garage, her hair tied up, holding a scrap of paper. I asked him, 'Who is she?' He didn't answer. He just said, 'That boy is dead, Caleb. You're not him anymore, just fix the cars.'" Hannah didn't seem surprised. "And you believed him?" "At the time, yes, because he was the only one left." And now? Caleb looked deep into her eyes. I think I was never the only one. I was just chosen to hold a rhythm that others couldn't bear. She nodded. Do you know why this place has been kept even though the whole town's dying? Because it's not a place to fix cars. Exactly. It's a place to fix people, or at least to see if they still want to hold on to their humanity. There was a long silence between them, as if speaking more would shatter everything. Finally, Hannah asked, So, will you let it repeat? Or will you hold on to this time? Caleb didn't answer. He simply walked to the door, took down the old open wooden sign, flipped it over. The faded words, "No entry twice." He nailed it to the inside of the door, where only those who had entered could see it. The next day, the garage was still open. A young boy walked in with a car problem. He shyly asked, Have you been fixing cars for a long time? Caleb replied, I've had to learn it over and over again. The boy didn't understand, but smiled and sat waiting. At night, Caleb wrote. This time the notebook had no other names, just one line. I remembered, and I'm still here. 3 days later, Grayridge was still caught in an unrelenting rain. It fell steadily, neither heavy nor ceasing, as if something deep beneath the earth refused to let go. Caleb sat alone in the office, the notebook before him filled with lines only he understood. In his mind, Hannah still appeared, not like a living person, not quite a ghost, but like an indentation in reality, a place where memories weren't allowed to speak their names. He remembered the last time he saw her, when she left the garage without looking back, as if completing a cycle or handing back a role. That night, Caleb opened the last drawer on the left. Inside was an unlabeled cassette tape. He played it, and this time the voice wasn't his father's, it was his own. If you're hearing this, you might not be me anymore, but there's still enough of me left to understand why I chose to remember. We weren't born to carry someone else's memories, but if no one else holds them, then who will fix the cracks? The tape ended with a whispered sentence. If you can still read this line, write on. Not for me, for the next one. The next morning, a 12-year-old boy rode his bike to the garage. He didn't give his name, only stood staring for a long while before asking, Are you Caleb Moore, the one who fixes things that no one else can fix? Caleb nodded. Depends on what it is. The boy opened his backpack, pulling out a broken wristwatch. This belonged to my grandfather. It ticks every day. Then one day, it stopped. But I still hear the ticking in my head. Caleb didn't ask more. He simply took the watch, walked back to the table. The boy sat across from him, his gaze exactly like Hannah's when she first came to the garage. That night, Caleb wrote, Maybe I'm not the only one holding the rhythm, but this time, I won't let go. 3 weeks later, Hannah returned, not to say hello, not to check up, but to stay. She came on a gray afternoon when the town had only 2 old men playing chess in front of the tavern. She wasn't dressed like the first time. Instead, she wore an old mechanic's jacket, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. She sat in the same chair Caleb used to sit in on rainy days. You don't have to go anywhere anymore, she said. Caleb didn't ask why. He simply nodded. Good, she said, because I'm starting to forget why I used to repeat. That night they sat in the office. Neither of them spoke. On the table were 2 cups of cold coffee, an old notebook, and a blank sheet of paper. Caleb picked up the pen. My name is Caleb Moore. I used to forget. Now I remember. And if you're reading this, maybe you're the next one. Appreciate you staying with us. Not everyone gets to hear the untold. If this intrigued you, drop a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the Untold Story to uncover even more.